Welcome, Earthlings. What you see in front of you is our guide on how to embed quotations artfully in an essay. There are 4 ways of embedding quotes that I will focus on today: the signal phrase, the key phrase, the colon phrase, and the block quote. To embed a quote, you are essentially incorporating seamlessly into a text rather than dropping it in. For example, like in page 74, the author says, enter quote here. This shows, etc. We want to find varied ways to introduce and use evidence in what we write so it becomes increasingly more sophisticated. So we want to go away from just always saying, on this page, the author says this means. For your upcoming essay, you will use at least 2 separate of the 4 strategies I mentioned. A block quote, which is one of the strategies, can only be used once. For a signal phrase, that's this first one up here. For a signal phrase, you will start with an introductory statement before you incorporate the quote, like in the example sentence, and the punctuation goes outside the citation. So here's the definition of the signal phrase. Here's the example. So this one says, Patton writes, the noise is immense, cars and buses, one behind the other, more than Kumalo had ever imagined. So this is obviously from a separate book. Okay, so it starts with the author writes and then incorporates the quote. And here is the parenthetical citation. I know this comes from page 47. And the period goes outside. This is probably one of the more straightforward ones that you've done before. So that's a signal phrase. The second way to embed a quote is by using what's called a key phrase. For this type, you will use keywords throughout a sentence of analysis, rather than just using the whole quote. This works best if you're discussing an author's word choice or language that is very specific. Always feel free to use the model sentences here as a guide for your own writing. So an example here, this one says, the land is desolate, its earth torn away by over-farming and overgrazing and overuse. I want you to notice how the quoted text is embedded straight into the sentence. It's not separate from the sentence. It's actually interwoven into the sentence. This is a more advanced style and is going to really set you apart as a writer. Notice again, we've got the citation and we have the period outside. So that is a key phrase. It is different from a signal phrase. Next is the colon phrase. A colon phrase sets off a quotation. You will introduce a point of analysis first and begin introducing the quote you will use with a colon. It's important to note that you need a complete sentence before the colon for it to work. So uses a colon to set off a quotation. So here is an example. Kumalo's brother John reveals his motivations for leaving the tribal village and embracing the corrupt power of Johannesburg. So there's one full sentence. Then instead of a period, there's a colon that leads me into my quote. And this quote should demonstrate what was in this first sentence. This was my analysis, and then this is the evidence. Then we have our citation with our period outside. So a colon phrase is pretty straightforward, but it's important that you know that you have to have a complete sentence. You can't just have half of a sentence and then put the quote there. Lastly is the block quote. This kind of quote phrase works best if you have a larger block of text that you absolutely cannot cut down. Again, you need to have a complete sentence before the colon, and then the larger quote will come after it. For this type only, you will cite by using the author's name and page number in the brackets. The period goes inside rather than outside the brackets in a block quote. So you can see that right here. We would normally have the period there, but it actually comes before it. So the analysis is here. Patton's novel chronicles a journey, both literal journey across the plains of Africa and a spiritual journey that forces Kumalo to confront his greatest fears. And then there is a block quote here. that talks about those greatest fears. Um, that is why it's necessary. If you look at the directions, it has to be 4 lines or more that constitute a block quote. And a block quote should be single spaced. So your rest of your essay will be double spaced and the block quote will be single spaced. My biggest suggestion is to write your paper like you would normally write an essay. And then in your revision, go back and find places where you can embed your quote more uniquely. You might notice that you always introduce quotes the exact same way every time. If you're struggling, I would use the model guide that I give you as well as this handout and start with a signal phrase first. Signal phrases are usually the most similar to how we would write naturally. Start planning for your essay. Good luck.